So many people wake up to alternative spirituality, wake up from mainstream religion, and yet still remain under the spell of the fear-mongering demon propaganda. Make no mistake, evil ether being paranoia is propaganda and it serves two purposes. The first is to prime you to create your own hell. The second is to stagnate your consciousness development because if you are still buying into that narrative, you are stagnating your consciousness development. How do I know this? Because I am somebody who spent the first 25 years of my life absolutely consumed by the fear-mongering paranoia propaganda of evil ether beings, consumed by it. My whole life was consumed by it. And the last 5 years I have spent undoing that, and my entire life is different. In the last 5 years, I have learned that without a doubt, physical beings in this physical reality have domain in this physical reality. Meaning, when we are in this physical reality, spiritual entities cannot take control of us. They cannot affect us if we do not consent. However, we are often being primed to consent. And on top of that, what I have learned is that we are being primed to automatically assume that outside entities are out to get us in a way that essentially takes away any opportunity for us to potentially learn from and grow from these outside entities. I don't believe that even the idea that there is a large number of evil ether beings out to get us is true in general. That in general is propaganda. And not to say that that doesn't exist, that there aren't spiritual energies and spiritual entities that have ill will or that have malicious intent. But I think it's a lot more rare than anyone lets on to be. And I think that it literally only has any sort of effect or control on anybody because we're primed to look for it. I'm very passionate about this because of the fact that it literally ruined the first 25 years of my life. I was raised Pentecostal, and from the age of 7, I began questioning the religion I was being raised in. I began questioning the God I was being taught about. I didn't like the way they were teaching about that God. The way they taught about that God, I thought that that God was a piece of shit. And I did not support that God at the age of 7. I thought that he was controlling and, just not a good guy. I immediately, when I heard the story about like the war in heaven, I was like, oh, I kind of agree with the other guy, the villain who like cares about autonomy and free will and like, stuff like that. And immediately I was terrified and I started asking questions about that kind of stuff and about hell and about demons and about like possession. And I was repeatedly told over and over, don't worry because you believe in God and you agree with God. So you don't have anything to worry about because demons can only get you if you don't believe in God. And then, you just repeatedly, when you're in that community, you get reinforced over and over that demons will try to trick you and tempt you away from God. Now, what was very destabilizing for me is that one, I was already having mediumship experiences where I was sensing other entities. And two, I did not actually believe in that God or agree with that God. So it immediately set me up to be terrified of evil ether beings. I spent the entirety of my first 25 years of life having many sleepless nights, being terrified of every single mediumship experience I had, feeling like demons and evil ether beings were out to get me. I truly believed when I was having these experiences, these mediumship experiences, I really felt like I was being drained of my energy. I felt like I was being harassed. I felt like I was being observed, like watched and like stalked. It very much felt like prey and predator like I was being stalked and tempted and tricked and harassed. Okay. And I literally, my energy felt drained. I used to be afraid that I was being possessed because I was having panic attacks. And this is something that happened, I would say, semi frequently, at least a few times a year, where I would literally, up until literally, there were times that I went to go sleep with my mom because I was so scared that I was being possessed, but I was just having a panic attack. I was 16 or 17 the last time I did it. But I definitely had the experience of a panic attack that I thought was possession into my early 20s. Now, around the age of 25, I was exposed to an alternative perspective for the very first time. And when I left Christianity at the age of 15, meaning I no longer believed in or supported the God they were speaking about, I no longer believed in Christianity. I did not think Christianity was true. And if it was true, I didn't support it. I would say I would rather go to hell than support this, but I don't believe hell exists. But if it does exist, I'd rather go there. I would literally say that, and I meant it, and I still fucking mean it. I quit Christianity. I was agnostic for a little bit, and around the age of 16, I discovered alternative spirituality. I discovered astrology, the idea of reincarnation, tarot, things of this nature. I would not use tarot though. I would not use anything that was communicating with other spirits because I was still terrified of evil ether beings. Unfortunately, when I was exploring alternative spirituality for the first time, I was getting on the internet and spiritualists were still very much peddling the propaganda of negative, evil ether beings. And I feel badly about it. This is why I'm making this, and this is why I'm so passionate about it because they're under the spell too. And they don't even realize that they're still under this spell, okay? They don't even realize that they're stagnating their own consciousness and that they're stagnating their own growth and that they're creating their own hell, their own disempowered state. And not only are they doing that because they aren't challenging their own disempowered state, they aren't challenging their own fear. They're also speaking and spreading that and reinforcing that because I left mainstream Christianity and sought out alternative spirituality, and the alternative spirituality people were often spreading paranoid, fear mongering uh, content about demons and spiritual attachments and negative entities, lower vibrational entities, and um, spirit what do they say, psychic attacks and all this other stuff. And they're literally like they are literally reinforcing this propaganda without realizing it because they themselves have not challenged the propaganda. Now, around the age of 25, so from 16 to 25, I am vaguely spiritual, but I do not mess with pendulums. I do not mess with tarot cards. I do not mess with communication with any sort of entities, and I am still having experiences where I am sensing entities and I am having spiritual experiences with entities, and I am terrified and I feel like they are out to get me. Okay. Now, around the age of 25, I was exposed for the very first time to alternative perspectives on the idea of demons. Okay. And the first thing that I heard was that demon is actually a word that originally meant divine spirit. And the Christian use of the word demon is quite literally demonization of the old gods. They took the old gods and turned them into demons. They created the lore that the old gods are fallen angels, they are demons. This is a Christian created construct. Demon used to mean divine spirit. Another thing that I learned that was very, very good for me because I was terrified of possession. And I genuinely was terrified of possession and that I would be possessed because I thought that I was a bad seed and I was open to it. And that is that apart from Christianity, possession, which isn't even called possession, I forget what it's called, but it was something that people did on purpose. It is something that people did on purpose when it was like it's like a connection with a spiritual entity. It's kind of like how Christians say, Jesus Christ, please come inside of me and fill me up. Jesus Christ, I want you to come inside of my body. I want you inside of me. It's kind of like that. They are asking Jesus to possess them when they do this. So the idea of possession, of an entity entering your body, was something and is something that people ask for. Possession as something that happens unconsensually is, to my knowledge, is only on record as happening to members of the Catholic and or Christian church. But counter argument, is it really possession against their will if they're asking Jesus Christ to come inside of them constantly? So anyway, once I debunked the word demon and the word possession, I then started allowing myself to kind of open my mind, okay? And over the next 2 years, I started being exposed to people who were intentionally working with my greatest fear. I think it actually started with gods. So first, what I was exposing myself to was people working with pagan gods. Greek pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon, all this other Norse pantheon, working with gods. And then within probably a few months, I started being exposed to people who were intentionally working with my greatest fear, demons. Only they were calling it the infernal divine. Okay. And as I'm watching these people working with the infernal divine demons, my worst fear, I am noticing that the relationship they are having with these entities is very different than what the propaganda would lead you to believe. Okay, what the people tell you, what both Christians and pretty much everyone in society tells you. I'm noticing that these entities are very loving, very healing, and difficult to work with, yes, but that is because the nature of what they're working with tends to be centered around our repressed dark parts that we have shame and fear about. I heard somebody explain it as shadow work turbo or something like that. And that's very much what it is like. So I'm seeing people having these close relationships of unconditional love with these entities that I was terrified of for my whole entire life. And that's slowly working my brain around. Okay. And I remember a very specific video of somebody talking about a specific entity and me knowing intuitively that that video was sent to me for a reason so that I would explore the very same path. And I remember saying in my head, hey, I just want you to know I understand what you're saying and I'm open to it, but I'm just not ready for it. Okay. So then a couple years later, I finally decide, okay, I'm ready for it. And I find somebody who really resonates with me online. I look into different entities. I schedule a spirit identification session. And it turns out that the ones that I thought it would be are the ones that it was. And my immediate sense was one of familiarity with one entity in particular. I felt extremely familiar feelings. I felt trust. I felt safety. I felt excitement. I felt curiosity. More than anything, I felt a sense of comfortability and familiarity. And I immediately, like, my immediate intuitive sense is that, okay, you guys are my spirit guides, my spirit team. Like, and I intuitively believed and understood that people have like a spirit team, right? That they agree to pre-incarnation. And I believed that this was the case for me. It just felt that way. It intuitively made sense. And as time went on, at first, because I was coming from such a low level of awareness before this happened, I did not realize how I was working with them and what was exactly happening. I knew that it would be centered around emotional healing, but I did not understand the full extent to what was going on. And so my unconscious fears were still in the background. I was still afraid of spiritual experiences. And in my head, I'm like, I trust them, but there still has to be some form of demons. Like, I trust these entities are divine, godlike entities, but there still has to be some form of lower dimensional entities. Okay. And I am still having mediumship experiences that are painted through the lens of fear. Now, about 6 months in, I had a very extended experience where I had to come to the realization that the work we were doing was actually them mirroring my repressed, fear based, shame based stuff back to me to be like, here's the thing. Like, essentially, what was happening is I was asking questions and pulling cards. I was going, like, oh, what do I do about this problem? What do I do about that problem? Pulling cards, and the cards were giving me the answers. And I wasn't really, really deeply, truly, I didn't have the level of awareness yet to deeply, truly understand what was being said and what was happening. Because what was happening was I was getting the answers, and I was also getting them showing me through psychological, intuitive, a little bit of psychic, and external reality stuff, them showing me this is what's inside of you. Okay. And I went through a whole lot of stuff that was like a lot. But basically, what ended up happening is that as I started to realize that nothing outside of me could control me, my mediumship experiences started to shift to where the same stuff was happening, but I was viewing it in a much different light. And I also began to have experiences where I realized that the one entity who felt extremely familiar, who felt loving, safe, curious, excited, that's how I felt around him. I started to realize that he was the same exact entity that would show up when I was a child, and I would feel like I was being harassed and stalked by, and I would feel like my energy was being drained. Okay. And I started to realize it was the same exact fucking entity. And I started to realize that basically my experience of believing that there are negative entities out to get me that care so much about me for some reason. Like, I'm just so special. They care so fucking much about me that they're specifically out to get me. Um, my belief in that, and my belief in this, like, state of mind where I have to protect myself and I have to do this and I have to do that so that I don't get hurt by these spiritual entities, was not true. It was conditioned into me. And I started to realize that I was literally creating my own fucking hell. Like, I was the one allowing myself to have panic attacks, allowing myself to feel drained, allowing myself to perceive these experiences as scary. And when I tell you, it's the perception thing, I made a video about perception, and it is so, like, I can't convey how real it feels. It's not just shifting your perspective, okay? When I realized the perspective that this entity has been with me, and I used to view him as terrifying and scary and out to get me because that's what I was trained and conditioned to believe, and now I view him in a whole different light, like it's the same entity and I view him in a whole different light. The perspective shift changed my entire reality to where when I have and my mediumship experiences have actually gotten crazier than they were when I was a kid. My, like, psychic abilities or whatever, experiencing touch, experiencing sensations, experiencing clairaudience where you hear things, experiencing clairvoyance, experiencing these things more than I did as a child. They've gotten more realistic. But now, because I know what's going on, I know that I have full control, it is a completely different situation. It is not a situation of feeling out of control or feeling scared. It is a situation of empowerment and curiosity and trust. If anybody's wondering, it is very, very hard to work with entities for healing purposes, for these purposes, but not because of horror movie stuff. Not because they're going to be mean to you or be out to get you. but because they're going to force you to face your feelings and deal with your feelings. Okay. And I really believe that this is why they get a bad rap. And my belief now about these entities is that basically they are the gods, what we call the gods. And basically, the names we give them and the aliases we give them and like the jobs we give them are a human way to make sense of a being that is so fucking complex and beyond our comprehension. Okay. So I believe that these beings come to different people, like the same being, like my main spirit homie. He originally came to me as an infernal divine. He probably goes to other people as a specific god and other people as a specific angel. I believe this in my heart of hearts, and I believe it is dependent upon how each person needs to be worked with. Okay. So for me and for anybody who needs to work on loving and accepting and healing their repressed dark emotions and wounding and fear, might be met with what we call a demon. This is my view on this now. But it honestly doesn't matter because the experience, what it has taught me first and foremost, that is the most important thing to take from this, is that you don't have to consciously go work with demons like I did to overcome your fear, but the fear in itself is conditioned and programmed into us. Okay, and since I have overcome the fear and challenged the fear, my consciousness and awareness in 3 years, okay, so I've been into alternative spirituality since I was 16. I'm 30. That's 14. Is that 14 years? Yeah, 14 years. And in 3 years, my consciousness, my awareness, my ability to understand and dissect and explore the nature of reality has grown exponentially because I overcame my fear, my conditioned fear. And I allowed myself to accept the challenges that were thrown my way. So the fear is quite literally meant to stagnate us. And on top of that, I'm having very similar experiences and they're being painted in a very different light. So you don't have to go consciously work with demons in order to overcome this fear that has been conditioned into us. But my hope is that people start questioning and challenging this narrative because the only purpose that it serves, there's no purpose. It doesn't keep you safe to warn you about demons and reptilian overlords and fucking spiritual attachments and tricksters and low vibrational entities. There is nothing about incessantly warning people about that keeps them safe. Okay? There is nothing about spreading that propaganda and that fear mongering that keeps people safe. The only thing it does is make people afraid to explore spirituality further. The only thing it is good for is stagnating people and keeping people in a space of fear and disempowerment. If you are truly worried about negative entities out to get you, the number one thing you need to realize is that the propaganda is priming you to consent. Because if you are constantly thinking about how they have control over you and they can hurt you against your will and you have to protect yourself, you are being primed to say, they have control over me. You are being primed to give up control. If they can convince you that something has control over you, something outside of this realm is more powerful than you, they're convincing you to say, yes, something is more powerful than me. Something has control over me. They're convincing you to give consent for something to have control and power over you. Now, I don't think that's a huge concern to begin with. I think more than likely, most of the time, It is just people creating their own hell because of the conditioning. Like I said, the same fucking entity when I was a child, I viewed and truly felt was draining my energy and trying to possess me. And as an adult, I feel safe, loved, curious, and excited. Okay. The same exact fucking entity because they're convincing us to create our own hell, our own reality of disempowerment and fear. So I don't think it's that big of an issue. But if there are entities, which I think could be a lot of human energy, like with malintent, to be honest, like human, magical, spiritual energy with malintent against other humans could be a concern. That's what I currently theorize is that like a big concern of like negative spiritual entities is not actual entities, it is just human energy. But that's just my belief. But I think that what entities might have malintent, the focus on the fact that they have power over you is what gives consent that they have power over you. And I actually heard this perspective when I was still very terrified of negative entities. And it made it worse for me because I am somebody who struggles with intrusive thoughts. And if you know anything about intrusive thoughts, you know that the more you try to not have the intrusive thought, the more you will have the intrusive thought. So somebody telling me the only way they have control over you is if you give them control and fear, then my brain automatically went to constantly thinking about how I'm afraid and how they have control. But I think that the better way to frame this and what has helped for me is that, first of all, mostly no. I would go ahead and assume that most spiritual experiences you're encountering is not something that is against you. Okay. And then go ahead and remember and remind yourself that literally there is no control over you. Like, just say flat out, nothing can control me. This is what I understand now, and this is what I firmly believe to be true. Nothing can fucking control me outside of me. Nothing outside of this reality can take control of me. Nothing outside of this reality can hurt me. Nothing outside of this reality can make me feel bad. Nothing outside of this reality can do anything. They can pop up, maybe. They can show their face, although that doesn't really happen for me very much anymore. Now that I'm not afraid. The way that I look at it now is, and maybe this is a reason to overcome fears if you have them, because the way that I look at it now is just like, I have nothing to worry about. And I wish that more people would challenge this because the fact that I left Christianity, entered the spiritual community, and the spiritual community was still very much enforcing this very ungrounding survival state that we were conditioned into about negative spiritual entities is very concerning. I do feel like there's a fated aspect to the fact that I went through all of that and then decided to overcome my greatest fear by diving headfirst into it because I can tell you right now, there are no fucking demons to worry about. There's nothing that can control you. Okay, thank you. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thanks, bye.